We're going to talk to Steve Baker now, former Conservative Government Minister. This government has no money, apparently. They're going to have to put taxes up, according to the front page of the Telegraph this morning. Taxes on the middle classes, by the looks of things, although it's not that clear who the middle classes are as far as the Labour government are concerned. But increased taxes for people on modest incomes, said Heidi Alexander yesterday. And she said that Labour would base its policy on fairness. Well, that would be a first. Let's find out from Steve what's going on. Steve, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. Thanks very much for having me on.
Not at all. Pleasure. We're focusing to a large extent this morning on what Heidi Alexander had to say yesterday about taxes. Obviously, the Labour government have run out of money. They don't know how they're going to tax us, but they just know that they are sometime in the autumn. But this whole kind of this madness about electric cars is kind of indicative for me of what's going wrong with the government. You know, they've got all these ideas that they think people should be changing their behaviour in one way, shape or form, and they're going to somehow use public money to get them to do it, except nobody's thought it through. I mean, you cannot possibly tell me that people who live in ordinary streets in this country, who park outside their house because they haven't got a driveway, you don't ever park in the same place. How can you have an electric charge point in one place and only you can use it?
Well, it's absolutely mad, Mike, isn't it? I mean, you and I both know perfectly well that most of your listeners will struggle to get a parking space. You know, how lovely it is for those of us who have got off-street parking. But for so many people, perhaps where they've got multiple cars in a house because the kids can't afford to get out and buy their own place,
right.
You know, it's a disaster to try and charge an electric car. I mean, the hypocrisy of the Transport Secretary is comical, but it's unfortunately very serious because she's going to be wasting public money trying to get people to do impossible things. And, you know, you're absolutely right. There's a kind of dissonance where they don't understand how people live. They aren't thinking clearly about taxation. And I bet your listeners will know that if you're on £50,000-60,000 a year, you're squarely in the sights of Labour for tax rises, but you're not having a generous life. You're probably struggling to make ends meet if you've got a mortgage and kids.
Yeah, and it definitely looks as though they're going to be dragging an awful lot of people into higher tax brackets, because that's one of the things they can do while still keeping their promises not to do it, if you know what I mean.
Well, they won't get away with it, Mike, will they? I was just looking at the breakdown of tax. 32% of tax is paid by higher rate taxpayers. That's people on 50,000 to 125,000. Now, I wouldn't mind being back to earning about 125,000 a year, but I bet those people who are on, say, 50 to 80, you know, that is, if you're living in London or the southeast, that is making it pretty tough to bring up two kids, pay the mortgage and have a family holiday. And I think those people will be very surprised to learn that they've got money to spare in this strange cause of fairness. And I think they'll be very alive to waste. They'll be very alive, as one of your callers said, to spending on illegal immigrants. They'll be very alive to waste going on to the energy system, driving up, not only waste in excess subsidies. Ed Miliband's bringing forward something today that's going to allow him to boost subsidies, but not only the waste on subsidy, but also driving up people's energy bills. It's a crazy way to go on.
Well, it is. And also, you know, surely you could learn a lesson from what it is that you have to do. If you have to subsidise things in order to make people want them, or in order to make people, you know, even be willing to consider them, then there's something wrong. You know, people don't buy electric cars because they're too expensive.
There's two ways to organise society, either the government's way, which is rule following and forcing people to do things, or the private citizen's way, which, whether people like it or not, is prices, profit and loss. And if you're making a loss, that's a sign that you should stop doing the things that you're doing. And instead, the government comes along and subsidises things which would otherwise be loss-making in order to force them to happen. Now, this might sound a bit arcane, but it should be obvious. If you're losing money, don't subsidise it. Don't do it. Do something else which makes society better off. This is why we face ruin, because politicians are insisting on daft policies. What we should be doing is following a policy of gas to nuclear on energy and making sure we've got abundant, affordable electricity so that everybody can get on. Plentiful electricity is absolutely one of the foundations of our civilization and prosperity. And yet we're adopting policies which mean that when the sun isn't shining, when the wind isn't blowing, we'll face real shortages of power.
Right. And also with more and more data banks that they want to build, with more and more kind of, you know, shall we say, things that need electricity, you know, we're going to have much higher demand. So we should be producing more, not trying to worry about how it's produced.
Absolutely. So some of my commercial contacts are now telling me that some of the big power users, like IT companies with enormous data center demands, they're now thinking of having their own small modular nuclear reactors. Now, I could see why they would want to do that, and I certainly think we should have more small modular nuclear reactors. But I don't think that users should have to come up with their own ways of delivering reliable power. The fact they're even considering it is a sign that energy policy is dramatically failing. You know, it ought not to be the job of a data center to run a nuclear power station. And, you know, if they are seriously considering it, Labour should think again and go for gas to nuclear.
Yeah, because what that tells you is that the commercial operators believe that the national grid is not fit for purpose. And many people tell me that it's come close to falling over quite a few times this year.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, there's plenty of energy dashboards out there. If your listeners just search energy dashboard, they'll find plenty of evidence that very often wind doesn't produce anything like the power we need, and sometimes it produces nothing. Sometimes, if the wind's blowing too strongly, it produces too much power, and we actually, if you can believe it, we pay them not to feed that power in because it's not needed. It's so that the systems become irrational and illogical, and we're all paying the price.
Yes.
And I'm afraid it is very serious. This is why people might be screaming at the radio, why didn't you do something? Well, of course I did. I led the cost of net zero campaign at some cost. But we were right. We were proven right. And I think over the years ahead, as we see with HSBC leaving that climate alliance, as American banks have done, we'll see that net zero is increasingly challenged. What politicians really should do is get on the side of the public and start adopting rational policies which drive energy bills down.
But what I read this morning in The Guardian, and I don't read The Guardian very often, I must say, Ed Miliband is to explicitly call out politicians who reject net zero policies for betraying future generations in an unprecedented update to Parliament about the state of the climate crisis that he is calling an exercise in radical truth-telling. He's become obsessed, hasn't he, old Ed Miliband?
Well, look, this is a great opportunity for the Conservative Party. Kemi's come out against net zero by 2050. She's basically taking the kind of line that I was taking, that yes, the climate's changing. Yes, CO2 emitted by people has had some impact on it. But what really matters is what we do and making sure it's rational. So if Ed Miliband wants radical truth-telling, well, I would encourage fact-checkers to go and have a look at the cost of net zero campaign run by Net Zero Watch. Have a look at what Andrew Montford says, the director of that project, because if we get some radical truth-telling about net zero, then current policy will very quickly collapse.
Yeah, I think so. We'll be talking to Andrew Montford actually later on in this hour, because there has been just a whole litany of ridiculous decisions made based on net zero. And no matter how much money this government says it doesn't have, they won't seemingly take any away from Ed Miliband and the net zero craziness.
Well, if you look at Labour MPs and what they're actually like, they just failed to vote for the relatively moderate adjustments to benefits. They're also completely addicted to this net zero craze.
Yeah.
And so asking them to vote for different policy is like, after all the promises they've made to their electors, that's likely to lead to another debacle in the House of Commons. And this is, I'm afraid, what happens when you get unserious politicians campaigning and failing to face up to the trade-offs that one has in life, and also actually failing to face up to evidence, and instead just going with groupthink, because I'm afraid that is what is afflicting us right now, really radical groupthink. If I may, you know, if people can go out there to Our World in Data, have a look at how much China is emitting, have a look at how much China's emissions are increasing every year. Chinese annual increases in emissions are more than our total. If the UK went to zero, China's annual increase would surpass what we had done. We've got to start behaving rationally in the context that we have. So, yeah, let's take action. But what we need is more gas power plants to cover the intermittency of wind and solar, and use that as a transition to always on, available, inexpensive nuclear.
Yeah, it is absolutely ridiculous. And when you look at exactly how much money they're wasting on net zero and how little effect it's having, whenever I get anybody on who's an advocate of it, I always say, well, so what happens if we get to net zero? Nobody ever knows the answer to that, because nothing changes, basically. You walk out the door, the weather's the same, you know, the river's the same height, you know, the same number of animals running around in the street, you know, nothing's changed.
Well, it's certainly the case that there's really, in context of Chinese emissions and where India's likely to be going, there is very little the UK can do to change the course of global emissions. I mean, our contribution is tiny, and for anyone denying that has not looked at the data. So we should be rational. It's one thing for us to aspire to emit less carbon. It's another for us to absolutely ruin ourselves doing it and pay the price for no benefit. And this kind of irrationality, it's mere politics, I'm afraid. I'm afraid terrifying the public gets votes, and too many politicians have been willing to terrify the public to get a vote, and then they have to follow through on their stupid policies. And I'm afraid it's unserious, and the best thing your listeners can do is punish these politicians by voting for the candidate who's most likely to offer them common sense.
Yeah. And finally, the front page of Daily Mail today, Labour's doctors strike hypocrisy. The workers' rights bill is going through even as we speak. We've got the the BMA talking about a strike for 5 days starting July 25th, which is apparently going to cost something in the region of about £64 million. It's a radical organisation being encouraged by almost the workers' rights bill. Soon they'll be able to strike without even having to have 50% of the ballot wanting to do so.
Well, it's back to the 1970s, isn't it? I'm just about old enough to remember the chaos that we had, child as I was at the time.
Yeah.
Certainly my parents' generation easily remember it.
Yeah.
But it took years to get sense into the trade union movement. But I mean, what next? Are we going back to closed shops? I mean, the bill that Labour have brought forward is a disaster. Andrew Griffith, the shadow business secretary, has been extremely good at pointing out its shortcomings. But now the Labour government has been once again caught in hypocrisy. They're criticising the manner in which the BMA has gone on strike, saying that not enough people voted for the strike to make it legitimate.
Right.
While on the other hand, as you say, doing away with the 50% turnout requirement. And again, if we could just ask, please, for some consistency in policy making, that would be a start in trying to improve it.
But this is the beginning, is it not, of a sort of summer of discontent, if you like, where it's going to be the train drivers next, it's then going to be the nurses, then it's going to be, the other train workers, it's going to be, other, civil service unions. They're all going to have a go.
Well, I'm afraid so, yeah. I mean, the doctors demand, much as they might like, very much higher pay. It's not realistic in the context of who's paying for it. And again, talking about taxes, I mean, your median earning listeners are going to be hit quite hard, it seems, by Labour in order to pay these doctors these extra wages. It's a pity they can't start thinking of the people that they serve. They are well paid in excellent jobs with great prospects.
And very good pensions, by the way.
Yeah, and they've had a large pay rise, and really they should be saying enough's enough. But on the wider point, yes, I'm afraid Labour engage in daydreams about what is possible, and in particular on employment rights. They seem to have no idea what it's like to run a company. I employ 2 people, and I'm very pleased and proud to do so. I'm very pleased and proud of the quality of my employees. But thank goodness I know that there are people on the centre right who broadly agree with me, and that means I don't have to worry too much about the enormous exposure to liabilities that employers will have under this new employment rights bill from Labour. It's really going to be prejudicial to the interests of the working people they purport to represent.
Yeah, it's absolute madness. Great to see you, Steve. Thank you very much indeed. Steve Baker, former Conservative Government Minister.